Welcome to Inner City Media, where we share stories of true crimes from the past and present. These stories are not to be glorified, but to be measured as cautionary tales. We'll take a deep dive into the minds of those accused and convicted of heinous crimes, and the victims who suffered an untimely death. When we think about New York City, things that come into our mind are all skyscrapers, people living corporate lives, and busy streets all day and night. Despite that, you can find good and bad people everywhere. During the 1990s to 2000s, there was a time when the neighborhood streets of New York were the battlefield of the infamous ganja war. Those neighborhoods were believed to be the base and stronghold of vicious and most wanted gangsters. Different gangs were involved in the power struggle over the dominance of the regional million-dollar drug market, which resulted in violent gang wars between local gangs that terrorized the peaceful citizens of New York and its neighborhoods for several decades. During the news conference, cops stated that the war was fought over three things: money, weed, and power. This organization committed terrible crimes and murdered several people throughout the years. The beginning of Bloodstain crew and Junior Stain's leadership. The story began when immigrants from Jamaica began sneaking into the United States for a better life and financial freedom after the 1980s general elections of Jamaica. In their early days, they were primarily involved in minor street crimes. Most of them worked as low or mid-level weed retailers, but soon they realized that they could generate enormous wealth by getting involved in the narcotics business as their own boss. During the 1990s, different Jamaican posses were evolving into organized gangs and were making a considerable amount of money from a thriving marijuana market in New York. The Bloodstain crew, also known as the 90s crew, was a violent Brooklyn-based street gang. According to claims of some accounts, it is stated that in the mid-1990s, Bloodstain crew was formed by Junior Stain at East 55th and Church Avenue in Brooklyn. Even though they had the name Bloodstain, they were believed to be the offshoot and highly associated with the Crips. Junior Stain established his illegal marijuana supplying business in several Brooklyn neighborhoods, including East Flatbush on 55th and Church Avenue. These residential areas were also believed to be Bloodstain's headquarters and strongholds. Junior Stain held most of his gang meetings inside these residential areas. At first, most of the crews restricted their narcotics operations to their self-proclaimed areas of influence. Still, the peace did not last long between them. Leaders of different crews had developed some terrible misunderstandings or feuds between them. Also, the different crew members' violent fights intensified over time. Eventually, bloody gun battles between different crews erupted on the streets of Brooklyn and its neighborhoods, primarily to gain more money and power over their rivals. Junior Stain had excellent relations and was allegedly believed to be the main link between these 50s and these 90s. Things were working out for the Bloodstain crew under the leadership of Junior Stain. They expanded their operations and spawned their influence outside their self-proclaimed territories in Brooklyn neighborhoods and its surrounding areas. Bloodstain crew members were also involved in home invasions of stash houses and confiscated massive amounts of narcotics from rival drug dealers. By then, they were also trafficking illegal narcotics like marijuana, ecstasy, and crack cocaine from Jamaica to the USA. Two incidents are most associated with the death of Junior Stain and are widely acclaimed by several people. According to some news posts, it was said that Junior Stain was killed by his rivals in his Utica Avenue apartment on Lenox Road in Brooklyn. While according to some social media accounts, it is also claimed that Junior did not die in his apartment, but he was found dead in his BMW on Linden and Utica. However, police could not find any suspects for the murder of Junior Stain. The Bloodstain crew, under the leadership of Rev. After the death of Junior Stain, the Bloodstain crew's leadership role was transferred to Godfrey Martin, nicknamed Rev or Machiavelli. Rev was born in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica. Rev attended a prominent elite class high school at Parrish, Jamaica, just before migrating to the United States of America at the age of 15. In the USA, he was involved in various drug trafficking-related minor crimes. Over time, he became the gangster allegedly known as the mastermind behind one of the most organized crews in East Flatbush. Rev, along with the help of his companion, Winston Coggill, established their connections with the giant marijuana suppliers in California. They shipped trailer loads of marijuana and other narcotics, which resulted in them making thousands of dollars each week by selling them in several neighborhoods of Brooklyn. Rev and Winston also made illegal narcotics deals with drug dealers who resided in other areas of the USA to expand their ganja empire outside Brooklyn and the East Flatbush area. Bloodstains became one of the most brutal and violent crews in the early 2000s. Things started to go off track when the Bloodstain crew's battles intensified as they became more bloodthirsty and greedy for money and power. Rev and the Bloodstains went to war with other crews who they were in heavy competition with. Rev was among the top names on the police most wanted list for his criminal activities, including drug trafficking and murder. Rev's leadership ended when he was arrested along with another gang member named Sheldon Shorter, nicknamed Junglist, in 2009. Rev was convicted of marijuana-related crimes and leadership role in the violent Bloodstain gang. Godfrey Martin, also known as Rev or Machiavelli, was deported back to Jamaica in 2009. Sheldon Shorter, who worked directly for Rev, was sentenced to 328 months in prison by jury rulings. Rev never abandoned his illegal business and criminal activities even after being deported back to Jamaica. Just recently, in 2022, illegal arms and trafficking charges were filed against Rev and two other men residing in the USA. Jamaican law enforcement agencies declared Godfrey Martin one of the most vicious criminals involved in illegal weapons trafficking into Jamaica. On August 7, 2022, the 51-year-old Godfrey Martin was arrested by Jamaican counterterrorism detectives following the raid on his warehouse in Kingston, Jamaica. Up to 18 handguns, 3 advanced rifles, and more than 2,000 rounds of ammunition were seized by the police. Gang wars of Bloodstain crew and victim DANE Plummer. During the early 2000s, Brooklyn and its suburbs suffered significant gang wars between rival gangs. Each crew had up to 20 to 30 members, and each gang was making nearly $100,000 per week. This gang war was fought primarily over money, weed, and power, and is now widely known as the Ganja War or Weed War. Jamaican drug crews had a significant role in street-level drug dealing throughout the decades. In the early 2000s, they were engaged in gun battles to gain more influence and control over the regional narcotics black market and to earn more wealth than their rivals. This gang war was thriving between 3 major gangs: the Bloodstains, the Pelpa, Sashi, and the John Chop crew. The bloodshed over drugs resulted in the deaths of innocent lives and gang members fighting for retribution for their fallen soldiers. The Bloodstain crew was notorious for its home invasion robberies at its rival stash houses. They would cover the walls and doors with bullet marks and shatter every window with bullets. They were infamous for killing every single person present in the house and leaving bloodstains over their corpses. After that, they would return to their neighborhood with stolen drugs. Law enforcement agencies declared them one of the most brutal and well-organized criminal groups in the USA for torturing their victims and murdering their entire families, including kids. In return, John Chop members started killing the Bloodstains crew influential members one by one at different public spots, even in their homes. The war intensified when the John Chop crew killed a Bloodstain crew member named Dane Plummer. Dane Plummer was a flashy young member of the Bloodstain crew. At 24, he accumulated an enormous amount of money from the illegal narcotics operations. Dane Plummer owned luxurious items. He always covered himself in branded clothes, gold, and diamond jewelry. Dane Plummer worked to project an image of prosperity by prominently displaying wealth and luxurious items. He used to ride around in his Cadillac Escalade worth almost $54,000, which caused the other neighborhood youngsters to be influenced by his personality and wealth. It was said John Chop members were looking for a great opportunity to take revenge on the Bloodstain crew by murdering Dane Plummer. It is claimed by Larry Chelona that on July 23, 2002, Dane Plummer was found unresponsive with a bullet in his head shortly after 2:00 a.m. after attending a Jamaican community party on the west side. Plummer had been standing outside Pier 63 near West 23rd Street and the Hudson River. When rushed to save his life, Dane Plummer died an hour later at St. Vincent's Manhattan Hospital. A few months later, the shooting suspect, named Kevin, was arrested by the police on December 11, 2002 when he was standing outside the Bronx nightclub. The police claimed that the shooting suspect had told them that the feuds between the crews were escalated by the robberies of the drug dealer stash houses, which led to violent fights among the crews. After that incident, Bloodstain and other crew members became more aggressive and violent. According to the reports, up to 12 people were shot dead, 20 were wounded during the gun battles, and more than 100 home invasion robberies were performed by both crews in just 1 year. Ronald Williams' leadership and Bloodstain operations. Ronald Williams, also known as Blackman or Marcus, was one of the most influential and brutal members of Bloodstains. During the early 2000s, Ronald Williams also worked with Sheldon Shorter, aka Junglist. Sheldon was Rev's great companion during his leadership of Bloodstain. When Sheldon was arrested with Rev, Ronald Williams became one of the most important players of the Bloodstain crew. By then, the Bloodstain crew had become the most violent criminal group, and agencies wanted to put an end to the gang once and for all. In order to do a thorough investigation against the Bloodstain crew, the law enforcement officers received judicial permission to wiretap the phones of crew members. At first, Ronald Williams and others were unaware of these call tracings, which gave the most critical information to the investigators against Ronald Williams and other members. Police recorded numerous calls from Ronald Williams. Ronald Williams discussed drug trafficking and arms smuggling with other Bloodstain members. Also, he confessed on a phone call that he had weapons stored on the roof of his house. Ronald Williams was observed by the undercover agents of law enforcement agencies receiving marijuana boxes in his mail and shipping them to his customers from his residence. Police seized several boxes filled with distribution quantities of marijuana with the help of these intercepted calls. In several other calls, Ronald Williams gave death threats to his rivals. Law enforcement agencies took severe action against him when Ronald Williams called his friend Campbell one day. They planned the robbery at the individual's basement that was filled with weed. On April 23, 2013, Ronald Williams called Campbell, gave him the address, and told him to deliver a bag of marijuana to the customer's house in Brooklyn. Campbell arrived at the address and delivered the weed to the customer's house. Just when Campbell was about to leave the house, he identified a cop's car observing him. Campbell asked the customer to keep the rest of the marijuana he had and to provide him with a hat so he could cover himself and make his escape. Campbell successfully got into his BMW, but cops started chasing him and tried to stop him. Campbell sped off in his car and drove in an erratic manner until he left the area. Campbell immediately called the customer and threatened him because he believed the man was a snitch who wanted to turn him in. Later that night, Campbell sought that customer at a restaurant where he was having dinner with his girlfriend. Campbell approached the customer's table and threatened him again. After getting out of the restaurant, Campbell called Ronald William and told him about the customer who he believed ratted him out. Campbell also told Ronald William that he wanted to give someone $5,000 to kill that customer. Ronald and Campbell both conspired to murder the victim over the phone, and it was all recorded. For the customer's safety, law enforcement agencies immediately obtained the raid order from the court. They took severe action against William and Campbell. Agents placed the customer in a safe house, and on April 13, 2013, police raided William and Campbell's houses. Cops found 3 pounds of marijuana and a loaded .40 caliber pistol in Ronald Williams' apartment. Cops searched another building in which Ronald Williams' apartment was located and found other weapons and rounds of ammunition on the roof of that apartment. Ronald Williams was arrested, and the trial began against him. During the trial, the recorded phone calls were used against Ronald Williams. Ronald Williams acknowledged participating in the narcotics operation of Bloodstains, and he also admitted to planning the robbery and murders on those phone calls. On December 3, 2007, an attempt to murder case was filed against Ronald Williams. It was alleged that Ronald Williams shot the victim 2 times during the verbal confrontation with the victim's family members, but luckily the victim survived. At trial, the victim identified Ronald Williams as the shooter. When all the trial proceedings came to an end, at the age of 43, Ronald Williams was sentenced to 24 years imprisonment by U.S. District Judge Lowe and Dearcy Hall. Williams pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder for hire, attempted murder, marijuana distribution, and drug trafficking. Campbell pleaded guilty to murder for hire, conspiracy, and drug trafficking and was sentenced to 9 years imprisonment in November of 2019. Bloodstain Crew, under the leadership of Winston Cargill and his son Tameka Cargill. After Rev's deportation back to Jamaica, Winston Cargill immediately restored his connections with the marijuana suppliers in California, Arizona, and other states of the U.S. Winston Cargill started receiving shipments of millions of dollars worth of illegal marijuana, which made other Bloodstain members rely heavily on him. After taking complete control of the Bloodstain crew, Winston Cargill started killing and murdering his rivals without letting anyone know. A rivalry arose between the Bloodstain crew and the 21st Street crew in 2003. After the failed drug deal between Winston and 2 members of the East 21st Street fatherless crew, it resulted in a series of violent drug fights between these gangs. In 2008, Winston received a message from one of his agents that police were about to arrest him and raid his stash house located at 90th Street in Brooklyn. Winston Cargill and his son, Tameka Cargill, were illegal immigrants. Still, somehow Winston Cargill managed to arrange fake passports under the names of Willie Lee Polk and Alfonso Dickerson. Winston Cargill and his son Tameka Cargill utilized those fake passports to travel back and forth from Jamaica to the U.S. safely in 2008. It is reported that Winston Cargill and Tameka Cargill sneaked from Jamaica to the USA as illegal immigrants. In his early 20s, Winston Cargill was busted several times by the police on charges for marijuana dealing, gun possession, and fake identification. Re-entering the USA was not Winston's first experience, as he had already been deported to Jamaica several times. In 1988, he was arrested by police 3 times in the same year on charges for selling cocaine and other narcotics. Winston successfully re-entered the USA illegally in 2011. Winston Cargill took control of Bloodstain crew. He started shipping large quantities of marijuana once again with other members of the Bloodstain crew. Winston Cargill restored contact with his old supplier named Buddy, who resided in California. Buddy had also dealt with Rev and was an old friend of Winston Cargill. Winston began receiving containers filled with marijuana that Bloodstain crew members would sell in Brooklyn and its surrounding areas. For payments, Winston used several money laundering techniques, including sending expensive cars and suitcases filled with cash to the supplier's location. After returning to the U.S., things went back to normal for both father and son for 2 to 3 years. They gained more power and influence over time and became vicious and cruel. They would invade their rival houses at night and kill their entire families. A murder case was reported against Tomeko Cargill on July 30, 2007. During the attack on his rival near Dorchester Road in East 21st Street, Tomeko Cargill sprayed bullets at the heavily crowded area. When the shooting ended, a man named Robert Dixon was shot dead on the spot, and 2 women were wounded. When Bloodstain crew became more violent, law enforcement intensified their efforts to arrest Winston Cargill and his son Tomeko Cargill. In 2014, Winston Cargill and 2 other members were smuggling up to 1 kilogram of cocaine on a cruise ship. Agents arrested Winston Cargill. Tomeko Cargill was arrested later by police. During Tomeko Cargill's trial, a member of the 21st Street crew named Ryan Anderson stated to the court that he was 100% sure that Tomeko Cargill had murdered Robert Dixon in 2007. After all the court hearings and trial proceedings, on November 8, 2019, a judge sentenced Tomeko Cargill to 121 months imprisonment at age 36. Tomeko Cargill was accused of racketeering, drug trafficking, passport fraud, and the murder of Robert Dixon. Winston Cargill was sentenced to over 36 months imprisonment at age 57. Winston Cargill was accused of drug racketeering, murder, and arms dealing. Winston Cargill and Tomeko Cargill are both serving their sentence till this day. The only place a negative mind goes is down. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Inner City Media. Salute.